So now we're going to take the knowledge we got from creating the previous terrain and put that to work for creating a more sophisticated, elaborate environment. It can have several different texture setups, all driven procedurally. And so for that, first we need to create some sort of environment where we can have those multiple texture schemes going on. And I think a good one will be something like I don't know, like a broken, rugged coastline. So let's start by creating a ridge. And I like the ridge because it has lots of different shapes, and we can, but it doesn't have too much of a character already, so we can just carve that in later. I'm not sure I like this seed exactly. I'll just type in something random, and I'm gonna increase the height because this is too shallow for the kind of water levels we might want to add. And this is looking good, but it's still a bit too geometric, so I'll increase the definition so it starts breaking up the ridgeline a lot more. So that's cool. I think we can bring the height down just a little bit, maybe a bit more. That's good. I personally don't like peaks that are too tall in such an environment because it's quite rare, and again, we're dealing with a large scale as it is, so if it's too tall, it can sometimes throw the erosion physics out of whack. It can also just create slightly unrealistic looking terrains. Anyways, so with this, I think the next thing I want to do is add a bit more warping, but we don't want to use the built-in stuff. We're just going to create a warp node so we can have a bit more control over what we're doing. So let's see. It's adding these nice fluid shapes here because the previous one, you can see it's a bit angular in its production, and here we can now have softer shapes, and that can help create something a bit better. I'm going to increase the roughness because it's too smooth, and we want to erode this further. And so if it's smooth already, once we get the soil deposits, it becomes too smooth. So let's see, this is starting to look good. Let's add, I guess, erosion now, because our shape is pretty much done. I don't want to do too much erosion in this, so we'll add a bit of random sedimentation so we get rocks and little random moving bits. So we have all of this. And then I think I'll reduce the inhibition just a bit and increase the down cutting. So this will reduce the soil flows and increase the little rivers coming down. But overall, I think we don't need to do too much here. Not yet. We can come back and modify some things. So what we want to do is kind of turn this lower area into a water body. And to do that, like, we could just fill this up with a lake node. So I could just type in lake or lakes, and there, it just fills this up. But I want to be a bit more strategic about it, and I want to have a slightly more story-oriented thing going on, because this looks just like, okay, so it's a water body, but we can extend this further by adding a fault node. And so the fault node creates a fault. It just basically carves out a giant canyon-like fault. By default, this is quite strong. We don't want it to be that strong, so I'll reduce the depth. So there we go. Maybe increase it by just 1 point. And then we can add a bit of chaos and widen it. So now that it's wider, we can probably make it a bit deeper. So that's good. And let's add one more fault after this. And in this one, we can play with the angle. And now we'll make it wider just like the other one and reduce the depth. I think in this one we might need a bit more depth, just so you can carve out this mountain a bit. Let's see if we can shrink it a bit. Yeah, I like this, where it doesn't need to go all the way to the end, not for our purposes. And we can also move it around, like, push it here and there. And at this point we can, I don't want to widen, because with too much chaos, it may not work. Let's have a bit more depth, and I'll change the angle just a bit. So there, that's cool. That has something kind of going on. This, we can reduce the depth now because we needed more of it back there. Here, if it's too much, it just eats it all the way to the ground. Here, we don't want to do that. In fact, this would be quite flat. Anyways, we can come back to that later. We'll test it once we get the water in. So we'll come back and make adjustments for that. But before we do that, what I want to do is create a mask for the fault. And so we get that in the secondary output. And I want to combine these two. So I'm going to drag a line out from the fault node secondary output, touch it to the other node's output. And it created this map for us. So let's add a new erosion node. And what we'll do is feed this, the combined output, to the area input, and then set the area effect to precipitation amount. This means erosion will only occur in this area. So that's starting to help. You can see the previous one where we would have like sharper areas. If I go back, you can see it's all of this, looks a bit noisy, a bit too CG. But now as we start adding this, it can become better. And we can enhance that further. So we could, let's say, use Shaper in the post-process stack and expand the area effect, or the area of the effect. We can also switch from equal blending to max mode and go 100%. And then if we go back to erosion, you can see all of this gets eroded more. Now the effect is quite reduced compared to when we erode the entire terrain, because it's happening in lower areas. So in that situation, I'll go increase random sedimentation quite a bit. So we get that rough texture going on. But then at the same time, I'll also increase duration. And inversely, I'll reduce strength a bit, because we don't want this to like eat everything. But with the higher duration, we get a lot of the material falling away. If we have too much strength, it just ruins everything. But with this, like if I reduce the strength even a bit more, and then increase the duration, apply again, you can see the kind of a coastal area we're coming up with here. So now we can go ahead and add a lakes node. So now you can see this is creating something quite interesting. This isn't turning out exactly as I'd hoped, so let's go back and tweak this. I will right click and reduce, or just half the value of the shrinkage, and maybe increase the chaos just a bit. Oh, there you go, nice cracks coming in. And now we can go more on the depth, and let's see if the width. Now the width is pulling it away because of the chaos. So I'll reduce the chaos and I'll pull it, or pull up the width a bit more. And there you go. Then we get this nice crack coming in, like the terrain's been cracked because of the water or something like that. And then going back to the lakes node, you can see it starts filling up in there. If I want to expand this further, I can increase the depth until I get that look I want. And we'll also increase the width just a little bit. Now I think I liked it where it was. And so, another useful thing is if you go away from a node, come back, and then you start experimenting and just want to reset this, better than undo, you can just go revert node. This sets it back to what it was when you selected it again. So I'll just revert the node and we get what we like. And I think the effect I want, I can get as kind of like a post change. So let me get the mask from this, and I'll send it to an FX node where I can use shaper to increase this. And then from there, I might blur this a little bit. And then I can also turn on max mode so I get both the main shape and some of the outer feathering. And then that I can, or no, not this. I'll take this and touch it to this output, so it can then combine or subtract the blur from this. So let me go and organize this just a bit because it's starting to look messy. And I'm going to select blur and press F11, which will make the node smaller. There you go. Oh, that's way too much. So let's reduce the subtract amount. In fact, because we are subtracting, I can just go back to the blur and clamp it to reduce the effect. And we could also just increase the blur. Since we're doing max, we still get the main shape below. So there, that's what's starting to happen. And because we're using this for erosion, I can then redirect this to the previous combine, so we get the outside area. And then erosion can happen there as well. Now see, one of the problems right now with this, and the reason we're losing some of it, is because it gets jammed with erosion, or rather with the sediment from the erosion. So what I think I'll do is I will go and turn on the min mode for the post effect. So now what happens is we get to have some of the new erosion at the coastline. So it goes from this to this, which is quite cool. I think we can even increase the down cutting. Now that I'm seeing it. Oh, let's go really high. Maybe not that high. There, that's cool. We have some detail going on along the edge. And so what we did was, we have the erosion, but with the min mode, the sediment is subtracted. So it's basically taking the lower of the two. So from the fault in erosion, it'll pick a pixel, or per pixel, it'll look at whatever's lower. So now, with that done, you can see there are some disadvantages to using min, because the previous one is so procedural looking, or rather CG looking, that we get some of that noise. But here it's not a big concern, because we're just going to fill this up with water, so all of that's going to go away. So now I'm going to click save just in case it, because this is now turning into a larger file. We don't want to lose any of it. Now let's look at this. That's cool. That's working out well. I think one of the changes we can make is this can be deeper. But now my problem with going deeper is that we lose all of the underwater goodness. And we're going to rely on that to create good textures for the water. So let's do this. Let's go all the way back to erosion. And that's right before we start cutting things out in fault. Now, if you look here, if you look at this reference mark and the grid, you can see we are pretty close to the ground. So what we want to do is raise this up. And we can do that by going to the clamp post effect and increasing the min. And that lets us push it further up. So because our maximum clamp is still way at the top, so we get to push this up. If you want to flatten this a bit, you can then bring the max down, but for us it's already nice and it's not tall, it's not too tall, so we don't want to mess that up. So We'll just leave the clamp min up here at 25. That gives us all this room. And now when fault starts carving things out, you can see it's not going through. It's now creating this beautiful valley structure. And then with the second one, similar thing. It's much deeper, obviously, but it works. It creates that nice extra bit. And then when we look at the combined output, I think we don't need to. This is probably now too much. We don't need that because we have two different things going on. We have the min mode, which is helping us remove the sediment, which was the key problem in that situation. And we also have the higher floor, so we're now not going to lose that much. So what I can do is I can remove this combine, and in fact I can remove all this stuff. Let's just bring it back to how it was before. And now let's look at how the lakes fill up. As you can see, this is a bit more interesting. Instead of just one big water body, we now have it looks like a complex river or a sound. Now, you'll notice there are lots of little lakes as well. And what we want is not a completely automatic lake system, but we want it to be in specific places. So for that, we can mask out the precipitation which creates these lakes. And let's try the simple method first. We'll go with height. This is a data map that lets you mask out the height. Now I'm going to go and pin this as the underlay so we can see what's happening. And you can see here, if I go 0 for the minimum and for the maximum, it's here. It masks out just this much. And there's a bit of a fall off. Also, this is using the percentage for the full metric-based system. So right now I could enter, say, 250 meters, and it'll adjust it so that the max is exactly at 250 meters. Now, if you don't use that system and you just want a simple one where it's not taking into account the actual height of the terrain's definition, which again, if you remember, it's in the build tab and down here in terrain definition. So our height right now, the maximum possible height is 2600 meters. And so this works accordingly. But if you just want to eyeball it, I recommend taking or switching to normalized. So then this is just what you see. So the 100% mark is right here at the tallest point of the terrain. So then this we can easily bring up. We kind of have a better feel for where it's going to go. So I think this is good. We can reduce the fall off just a little bit because we don't want the spillover outside. And now let's connect that to the rain input of the lakes node. So now you can see water only fills in here. This in of itself is already starting to look cool, and there's a lot of potential here with this, especially story-wise. But let's increase the precipitation amount. And just like erosion, this is a heavy node, so you have to click Apply Changes or lock it. So with more precipitation, we can see that the lake's now filling up, or the river, or whatever it is. And now we have spillover. Now, in many ways, we might want to avoid this, but because this is a shallow area, it's a great texturing opportunity. And since we don't have a big creative direction or any other mandate that tells us we can't, then why not? Let's play with that. So let's see, if I just push this to the maximum, this is the water body we get. It's a bit higher than I thought it would be, so I'll reduce it. I like the shape that it's creating here, a few extra bits. So before we start texturing things around, let's just look at the basic depth of the lake. So for that, we have the depth output here, and I will create a quick color node to quickly visualize the water. You can see this is now pinned all the way here. So what I want to do is right click the lake node and pin that as my underlay so I can visualize. And the black and white's a difficult color to make out the water in, so let's switch to this. You can see the valley that it created is giving us the depth of the lake now, and so we can use that to create some interesting textures. Quick color may not be the right way to go. Later we'll actually use a clutter node or something to create that, just like we did with the mountain lake. But for now it helps us visualize what this will be like. So let me just delete this. And now let's start prepping this for more elaborate texturing. So first of all, I'm going to rename this graph and I'll call this the construction. And I made a habit of just giving these tabs different colors. It's just easier to recognize when I'm working and quickly switching between tabs. And so let's start creating a few portals that we'll access later. So first of all, we want our erosion. I'll select erosion, press C, which brings up the menu, and I'll convert output to portal. And then let's take this and move that to a new graph, and let's call it water production. Because later, if you want to do other things with the lake, this is a good place. And so the other thing I think I want to do is get the other maps out there as well. So let's take the where, I'll drag it out, which is the other way to make a portal, and also the flow. So these are now going to be available everywhere in other tabs. So we have the height and this, so that's going to be plenty for this. Let's create one more tab, and I'm going to call this color production. So first let's bring in a texture node, and the texture will use the output from the erosion node. Now I'm not going to use the lake because the lake has the flat surface, which means that at some point the texture starts looking weird. Like here, you can see this is flat because our pinned node is this one. But if I go and pin erosion, then go down here, so you can see this is what we are using for our texturing, and then it can fill it up with water, and that's fine. But for texturing purposes, for the terrain, we should use the last height field before the precipitation, or the lakes in this specific case. So let's take this and let's just feed it to a sat map so we can start seeing different color schemes. Just by looking at this stuff, it can help visualize certain things. In the color production, so I mentioned that we'll create multiple color schemes or color texture sets for this. And so one of the things we get to see in real life is that certain mountains or hills may have a specific mineral or something else that spills out, and then it changes the coloration of that area. And that's something we can use to give different terrains a good character of its own. Now, one of the easier ways is going out and masking this place or that place. But let's try to stay procedural, or at least as procedural as we can. So I'm going to bring in, let's try a Voronoi node, which is a common enough noise. And so what we'll do is let's change the scale just a little bit. I'm gonna get some peaks going here, and I'm gonna go down to the post-process stack and turn on clip, and I'm gonna start getting something like this. And then that let's take to a FX node, just so we get a bit more flexibility instead of using the post-process stack for expanding the shape. So here we can expand a bit, and this can be our mineral mask, and I'll illustrate how we're going to use that. So let's create another sat maps, and let's think of this new one that we're making as the base color for this entire landscape. And so it can maybe be something green like this, or like this. Maybe it's rocky like this. Oh, that's not too bad. And I like to avoid green in the main maps, because later we are going to add like vegetation on top of it. And if it's in the gradient, it will bleed and it has softer shapes. Like here, if it's blending, it can get soft. What we want are sharper dots for vegetation. So we'll come back to that later. So for now, we're just going to try and avoid green. So let's say this is the base map, and then this is the color of the mineral that's going to be spilling out. And so to do that, what we'll do is, let's create a new erosion node and have that feed from the previous erosion node. And in this one, we're going to take the area and connect that to the mask that we created. That's this. So here we can now go and use precipitation amount like we did before. And it's now feeding off of the mask. So to see that effect more clearly, if I increase random sedimentation and duration, you can see that's the area that it's affecting. And we can always just go in, randomize this, and it starts affecting different areas. You can see it's ruining our terrain, and I'm not really concerned about this because we're just using it to create new masks. And let's put that to work. I'm going to combine the two different minerals, set it to 100% blend mode, and then as a mask, I'm going to create or bring in the where map, and I'm going to feed that to an FX node so I can control the mask because it's quite delicate. So I'll use auto level and maybe a bit of logarithmic scaling to expand that. And then maybe a bit of shaper to bring it just a little bit in. And if we feed this to the combined node, there you can see there are two different systems in play now. And then you can always bring it in. So let's say if I want to work on this, what I'll do is right click and pin this so the preview is pinned just to this. Then go to this node and start making changes. So if I were to go and make this equalized, it's much stronger, so we get to see it. But then I can use shaper and sort of reduce its sprawl. And now we have this. I can go back to Voronoi, and again, if I increase the jitter between the points, that changes. I can also try different seeds. And because it's not meant to be specific to a mountain, like if it were, like let's say if it's just from this slope, I would actually paint that in. And the way I would do it is, let's say I'll create a new mask and I will give it the erosion node as a reference for me to visualize. Click edit mask, and here in this area, I would just create like a dot. And then use that as the mask for the area input in the erosion. So now you can see it's coming out here. And then when I go to the FX, the previous effect is way too strong for this. So we turn off everything. Or in fact, I'll go here and go reset nodes to default. There's the original. We just do auto level. If we want, we can add more expander just to expand it. And then now if we go to the combined node, you can see it's spilling out just from this. We could also take the deposit output, so we could combine these two, or actually let's keep them separate here. So I'll add another FX node so we have control over this, and that it can be controlled differently from the other node. Then we can combine the two. So I'll right click and select preset and 100 max and send that to the mask. So here, let's look at this. Logarithmic scaling will work in our favor here. Oh, it's going into the water. So That'll be wasted a bit, but who knows, maybe you'll get some good effects at the edge. So there's it's combined, and we have this. And even in the combined, we can use the shaper, beef it up a bit, and then if we wanted to add more chaos, let's add a warp node. And I'll reduce the scale, increase the strength, pretty much kind of what we did for the lake in the mountains. But I'm going to rely a bit on the roughness and then add a few more iterations so it creates these really funky shapes. And then let's experiment with a few different modes. So if we go min, we kind of get this. If we go max, we get this. And if we go diff, we get this. This actually might be quite cool. Let's see what that looks like. Yeah, that's not bad. Now let's go and look at, oh wait, it's not fed in. So let me feed that in now. I forgot to redirect it. See, that's why I like to keep a clean graph. Otherwise you sometimes forget where things are going. There you go. So now we have these patches. So if we go back and if we go to max mode, then obviously we're going to get a lot of it. And then let's see, min mode. Oh, this is nice. I like this. Let's see if I can expand this more. Make it stronger with shaper. Yeah, this looks cool. This looks nice. It feels like it's coming out, especially because we have this carved out area. So we have these two options. So we can use this, or we could use a procedural mask like so. And so let's switch back and see the effect of a procedural mask with this chain. And you can see it's there. If you feel this is like too strong, if it's in too many places, all you have to do is go try changing the seed a bit, and you can also increase the clip minimum. So it will eat away the bottom of the Voronoi, and that way you'll get fewer patches. So now if we go back, so you can see it's like this. Neither way is better or worse. It's really what you want. So if we were to create multiple variations later, if it's procedural, it'll automatically just give us something new and random. If you want it to be very precise, then you can use the painted mask. This means when you create a new variation, you'll have to go and manually place this elsewhere. So we know how this works, and you can use that if you like. For this particular exercise, we're just going to stick with this procedurally generated mask. And let me pin this and then go back here, and we can try a couple of different seeds. Oh, that's not bad. I like this. Makes it feel like this side of the river has something else going on. Now, what we're doing here doesn't have to be just this one thing. So we could just replicate this entire thing. So we could just select all of this and press Ctrl D to just duplicate the whole chain. So I'll go here and I'll press E to select all the descendants. I can move them a bit. Bring them down here, or organize it a bit, and then all I have to do is go to the Voronoi. I have to release the pin, so I'll go here and uncheck this. So here, let's reduce the jitter and just play with a bunch of different seeds. It's fine, we don't have to worry about it just yet, what it creates. And then we repeat the same process, and we get this. Now what we need is a third map. And so to do that, and without making things more confusing, let's start naming them. I'll press F2 and we can rename the selected node. This one I'm just going to call the base color. base color. This one I'm going to call the iron ore. I know it's not exactly what iron ore would look like, but it's a cool enough name. And you can see we are just using the same texture because there really isn't that much massive variation in texturing in nature. All of that happens at a smaller level. And so if in terms of like VFX or games, you're going to add other assets like vegetation or rocks or whatever that'll change that. From up here, we'll try to keep the color variations to a minimum and not create too many noisy looking textures. So for that, we're just sticking to this one texture node. Now, let's say if we wanted variation, like in the new mineral that we're going to create, all I have to do is just add a warp node. And we'll just give it a few iterations so it starts creating this kind of a shape. It's too flowy for me, so again, increase the roughness. And then so far, we've been using Perlin of fractal Brownian motion for the warp source. Let's try a bit of Voronoi. So with this, you can see we're starting to get different kinds of shapes. The iterations are too high, so we don't get to see the big differences. But I like this. I like the striated look. So let's stick with that and then feed that to a new SatMaps node. Oh, that's interesting. But I think this color scheme won't really gel with what we have with the base and other map. This may be a bit too much like the iron ore. That could be interesting. So I think what we can do now is I'll take these two, keep them here, and then we'll feed this to another combined node and this to that same node, and we'll do what we did before, go maximum blend and then give it a mask, and that's our second mineral. As you can see, it's coming up here, here, and here. So now I can pin this, go back to, or right here, go to the SatMaps, and we can try out a few different color schemes.